Welcome all to End Food Insecurity, a matter of justice and learning responsible YouTube channel. I also want to welcome today's guest, Marc Aoun, the co-founder of Compost Baladi. Compost Baladi is a Lebanese social enterprise specialized in bio-waste management in different scales. And among the different lines of services that they provide, they also raise awareness on agricultural topics and on the importance of sorting at source and composting to citizens, students, farmers, and underprivileged communities. To date, Compost Baladi has empowered and achieved several national success stories in waste management, waste valorization, and wastewater treatment at different scales. Since today's topic is about reducing food waste by composting, I want to ask some questions to an expert in this field. First, where does most food waste in Lebanon come from, like restaurants, grocery stores, households, or others?
So the large majority of food waste today comes from households. Of course, there are a variety of streams. Restaurants are a big part. Produce markets are a big part. Essentially, every part of the food value chain produces waste. From transporting it, importing it, selling it, distributing it to retailers at the restaurant, as well as, of course, at the consumer. However, we see the biggest volume and quantity ending up in landfills from the side of the households.
And how does food waste contribute to climate change or sustainability?
So looking at a climate change component, food waste has a significant contribution in terms of the resources needed to produce food. So anytime we put a lot of resources such as water, energy, fertilizers into producing a certain food, and if it's not consumed, there is a huge waste of not only the food itself, but all those energy resources of transporting it that went into that material that contribute to climate change and emissions in general. Once the food waste is generated, and most often is ending up in landfills, it starts producing gases, particularly methane, which is over 80 times more potent and of a greenhouse gas effect than CO2, that heavily contributes also to the challenge of climate change. Overall, we can also look at it from a sustainability perspective. The reuse of food waste or the recovery of food waste has a lot of opportunities in contributing to combating climate change because it allows us to sequester as an absorb carbon or CO2 from the atmosphere and fix it back into the soil. So it's one of the few solutions, biological solutions, that would allow us to reverse part of the climate change effect that's taking place, compared to several technologies today that focus on reducing the amount of emissions, such as solar panels and things of that sort. Here we can actually work on reversing the past and the impacts we've done in the past.
Okay, so there are several ways in reducing food waste, and composting is one of them. Can you give us more information about what is food composting, what are the benefits, and how it can lead us to a better future?
Right. So before we go into composting particularly, I'd like to touch on the hierarchy of waste management when it comes to food waste. So just like there's a hierarchy with recycling where you say reduce, reuse, recycle, with compost or with organic waste particularly, the first component is to reduce food waste. So this is improving the efficiency across the value chain, making sure less food is wasted, potentially looking at second uses of the food. A lot of practices that a household can do, for example, how they store their food in their fridge, which allows it to perish less and store longer, how they purchase food as well in large quantities or in small quantities, can have a heavy effect on how much food is ended up wasted. How we serve our guests in our generous culture and how much we overproduce for a certain meal is a big effect on food waste. So reducing is the biggest impact that you can achieve in addressing food loss in general and food waste. But after that, we can talk about feeding others. So if I can't eat it myself, I can feed others. This is about donating food to the people in need. There are many organizations today around the world offering services to help these people. And once it's something that we cannot feed to people, for example, let's say the skin of an avocado or of a pineapple, then we talk about feeding animals. So we can give most of this food waste to animals. It's an even more important recycling than composting, because you're taking that food directly to an animal. You're not going back through the whole cycle of the value chain. And once it's something that has rotten or has become perishable, then we can talk about what's the best way to dispose of it in a way that it's back into the cycle. This is where composting comes in. And composting is simply speeding up what nature does. It's taking the concept of biodegradation and making it in a concentrated location while monitoring all the environmental conditions to ensure that the product is safe and the environment where you're doing this work is safe.
One of the most asked questions is that, what are some easy ways that we can compost food at home?
So this is going to depend on what kind of setting do you live in. So if you live in a building, that's you need one approach. If you're living in a villa, that's another approach. In the mountains or in a rural area, that would be a different approach. Essentially, all you need is to prepare a pile of material, that is the food waste you generate. And for that food waste, you have to add carbon material, which is essentially wood chips, shredded wood from trees or dead leaves, to make the right mix for the bacteria to eat. You have to manage the water content so that it's between 40 and 60%. So in a way, it feels like a dried sponge or a rinsed sponge. And you let this process happen over a period of 21 days, which allows us actually to ensure the fermentation process takes place. Once that material is fermented, we always aerate it to ensure that the bacteria are getting oxygen. We can take that material to a phase called curing. Curing is when we take the material and just let it rest, just like they do with cheese and aging. After a period of 45 days, then we have what is called a finished compost. So for a household, this can mean doing this in a bucket where they rotate the bucket themselves. There are many products on the market that we sell and other suppliers offer for particularly addressing food waste in urban settings. In a rural area, we can do a small mesh box or wooden bin, or we can just even do a pile. We just want to protect it from the rain, essentially. And the best method, in my opinion, for composting on a household level is to work on something called community composting or building composting. This is when the whole building agrees to put a designated area for composting, where the system is more efficient because it's receiving more waste, while at the same time, it's not something that you're dealing with on your balcony. It's a bit isolated from you in case there are any pest attractions from mismanagement or anything of that sort.
In your opinion, what is the future perspective of food composting?
So in terms of the future for it, I think the future is very promising because today and for the past several decades actually, we've lived in the privilege of not having to care for food waste. Resources were somehow plentiful and things were very cheap. But as we see global crises take place in energy, food supply, pandemics, and we see these global supply chains being disrupted, we really have to see composting as a means of achieving certain food security, but also as a means of having a certain self-reliance as a country, as an entity on different scales. So I see this becoming a more and more valuable resource to a point where food waste becomes a traded commodity. In the sense that composting this material and producing a fertilizer is going to be a key substitute to the chemical fertilizers that are constantly growing in prices and slowly degrading soils from depriving them from organic matter. So yeah, I think composting is going to be a growing sector. It is a growing sector, and the food waste particularly is going to be at the center of attention in terms of resources that we can recover and valorize.
Okay, finally, can you tell us more about some initiatives that Compost Baladi took in order to reduce food waste?
So Compost Baladi works on several fronts. One of the key things we do is we empower households to be able to take action without having to wait for governments to take decisions towards composting. So that means any person can gain the knowledge through us or the tools necessary to start composting on a restaurant scale, on a community scale, on a household scale, and be able to take action immediately. So we do a lot of this work here in Lebanon and are expanding this into the region. And we also work directly with the municipalities and agro-industrialists. So one case here, we're in Hazmiya, we work with all the supermarkets in the region. We take all their food waste, process it into compost, and we sell the compost back into the local market for farmers using larger technologies that are called the container composter that we've developed. And lastly, we work directly with the farmers to teach them about different usage of compost, soil management techniques to really increase their self-reliance, reduce their input costs, and make them more economically viable, further pushing us towards food security and self-reliance.
I really want to thank you for helping us in providing such information. We as End Food Insecurity, we believe that by continuously pushing for a sustainable future, it is our duty to work on the environmental and social issues faced today. And real change demands for social movement and starts with educating ourselves and taking responsibility one person at a time.